I was holding the banner when the chanting began. Eradicate Christianity. Eradicate Christianity. Around me, 150 Muslims, students, dock workers, refugees, families, all united in the same mission: stop this church from stealing our people. My grip on the megaphone was tight. My certainty was absolute. I was Yusuf ben Khalid, defender of Islam, and I had never been more sure about anything in my life. But here's what I didn't know: that freezing Sunday morning in Marseille, in less than 72 hours, everything I believed about God, truth, and my enemies would be torn apart. And the weapon that would destroy my certainty wasn't violence or arguments. It was something far more dangerous. My name is Yusuf ben Khalid, and I was born to protect the faith. That's what my family always said. That's what the mosque elders told me. That's what I believed about myself every single day, for 32 years. I had no idea that standing outside St. Agnes Catholic Cathedral, with a megaphone and 150 angry Muslims, would be the beginning of losing everything I knew, and finding everything I'd been missing. The call to prayer was my alarm clock from the time I could remember. Our apartment in Marseille's 3rd arrondissement sat just 2 blocks from the mosque. I woke to the Fajr prayer at dawn every single morning. While French boys my age slept peacefully, I was already washing my hands and face in cold water, preparing my heart to meet Allah. My mother, Amina, taught Quran to neighborhood children in our living room 3 afternoons a week. She had memorized half the Quran by the time she was 16. She never raised her voice, but when she recited, even the rowdiest boys fell silent. Everyone in our neighborhood knew her as a woman who walked closely with God. My uncle Rashid was an imam at our mosque. He had a long grey beard and kind eyes that turned sharp when someone questioned Islamic teaching. He would place his hand on my shoulder after Friday prayers and say, "Yusuf, you have the gift of passion. Use it to defend what is true." I didn't just want to make my family proud. I wanted to make Allah proud. I memorized my first surah when I was 8 years old. By the time I turned 14, I had memorized 18 chapters. My father would invite guests over just to hear me recite in perfect Arabic. I would stand in our small apartment, the scent of mint tea filling the room, and speak the ancient words without a single mistake. The elders would nod slowly. They would tell my father that Allah had blessed him with a special son. They said I would grow up to be a voice for Islam in a city that was forgetting God. Their words filled me with purpose. I studied Islam with the intensity other teenagers gave to sports or girls. While my French classmates went to cafes and talked about football, I sat in the mosque library reading commentaries on Hadith. I learned the arguments against Christianity, against secularism, against anyone who threatened the purity of Islamic teaching. I wasn't just religious. I was a guardian. Then, when I was 23, something happened that set my path in stone. A Christian missionary group set up a booth in La Canebière, Marseille's main boulevard. They had a sign in French and Arabic: "Questions about Jesus? We'll answer honestly." They were handing out Bibles translated into Arabic, smiling at North African immigrants, speaking our language. I watched from across the street, and rage built in my chest like a fire being fed gasoline. How dare they come to our neighborhoods? How dare they target vulnerable refugees with their corrupted book? The Quran clearly states that Christians changed the scriptures. The Bible couldn't be trusted. And these missionaries were trying to confuse Muslims who didn't know any better. I gathered 8 young men from our mosque. We marched up to that booth and surrounded it. We started reciting Quranic verses that exposed Christian errors. We challenged every claim they made. We made sure every Muslim walking by could hear that we knew the truth and they were spreading deception. A crowd formed. Phones came out. The argument grew louder. The missionaries tried to respond with gentleness, but we talked over them. We quoted scholars. We cited contradictions in their Bible. We made them look foolish in front of everyone. Eventually, police arrived and dispersed the crowd. We walked away victorious. We had defended Islam in public. We had protected our community from Christian manipulation. That day, I discovered my calling. I would become Islam's defender in Marseille. I would study Christianity inside and out, not to understand it, but to dismantle it. I would learn their arguments so I could protect Muslims from their tactics. I would be the voice that spoke truth when missionaries tried to steal our people. For the next 9 years, that's exactly what I did. I became the youth organizer at our mosque. I started a study group called Defending the Faith, where we learned how to debate Christians. I created social media accounts exposing Christian missionary tactics. I spoke at Friday prayers about the danger of evangelical churches targeting refugees. I wasn't hateful. I was protective. At least, that's what I told myself. Then Agnes Cathedral crossed a line. They started hosting nightly rosary prayers in Arabic and French. They opened a food distribution center. They offered trauma counseling for refugees. They provided free French language classes. All of it targeted at North African migrants, most of them Muslim. On the surface, it looked like charity. But I knew better. Charity with conditions. One speaker at our mosque warned during Friday prayers. They feed your body to poison your soul. A soft invasion, another said. They're too smart to preach openly, so they use kindness as bait. I agreed completely. This wasn't compassion. This was strategy. We heard stories of Muslim refugees attending their programs and asking questions about Christianity. We heard that some had even started reading the Bible. The cathedral was using people's vulnerability, their hunger, their trauma, their need for community, to pull them away from Islam. That's when I decided, enough. I organized the protest for Sunday morning. I made banners. I wrote the chants. I rallied youth from 3 different mosques. I contacted local media. I prepared a list of accusations to read through the megaphone. We would stand outside St. Agnes Cathedral and make our message clear. Stop targeting our people. Stop your manipulative charity. Stop pretending Christianity has anything true to offer. We would make them leave our community alone. That's why, on that windy Sunday morning, I stood at the front of 150 Muslims with a megaphone in my hand and absolute certainty in my heart. The cathedral bells were silent. Police officers watched from a safe distance. I raised the megaphone and began shouting accusations: manipulation, deception, cultural erasure. The crowd roared behind me. Our chanting grew harsher, angrier, louder. I felt powerful, righteous, unstoppable. Then something happened that cracked my entire world. The cathedral doors opened. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Slowly. I expected priests to come out shouting back at us. Or police forcing us to leave. Or cameras. At least, some kind of confrontation. Instead, a line of elderly nuns stepped outside. Behind them came young volunteers pushing carts. On those carts were blankets, bottled water, fresh bread, and bowls of steaming hot soup. No signs. No slogans. No microphones defending their beliefs. Just food. And that's when everything started to fall apart. The chanting stuttered. Voices that had been shouting in perfect unity suddenly became confused, uncertain. I could feel the energy of the crowd shift behind me, like a wave that had been building momentum suddenly hitting an invisible wall. The nuns moved slowly, deliberately. Their habits were simple gray and white, their faces weathered but peaceful. They didn't look angry. They didn't look afraid. They looked prepared. Like they'd been expecting us. The volunteers, young people, maybe college students, began arranging the carts in a line facing our protest. Steam rose from the soup bowls in the cold November air. The smell of fresh bread cut through the tension. Real food. Hot food. "What is this?" someone shouted behind me. "It's a trick," another voice called out. But uncertainty rippled through our ranks. We had come ready for battle. We had prepared for confrontation. We had memorized our arguments and sharpened our accusations. We had not prepared for kindness. Then he emerged from the doorway. A short man, maybe in his 60s, with grey hair and a worn black cassock. He walked with a slight limp, but moved with quiet confidence. He didn't stop at the police barrier, where it would have been safe. He walked straight toward us. Straight toward me. The crowd fell silent. He stopped about 3 feet from where I stood, close enough that I could see the kindness in his weathered face, the peace in his eyes. "Peace be with you," he said in perfect French, his voice calm and clear. "I'm Father Matteo." I tightened my grip on the megaphone. My knuckles went white. "We don't want your peace," someone shouted behind me. Father Matteo nodded slowly, as if he'd expected exactly that response. As if he understood our anger and wasn't offended by it. "You've been standing for a long time," he said, looking directly at me, then sweeping his gaze across the crowd. "It's cold. Your hands must be freezing. Your feet must be tired." He gestured toward the carts. "Please, eat. Drink something warm. Then you may continue your protest if you wish." The crowd fell into complete confusion. This wasn't in our plan. We had strategized for arguments, for debates, for confrontation. We had prepared responses to every possible defense they might offer for their missionary work. We had no response for soup. "It's poisoned," someone yelled, but the voice sounded uncertain. "They want to weaken us," another protested. But I could see some of the older men in our group looking at those steaming bowls with something like longing. We'd been standing in the cold for almost an hour. The wind cut through our jackets. Some people's hands were shaking, from cold or adrenaline or both. A few protesters at the back began to edge forward. Hesitantly. Cautiously. Like children who would been told not to trust strangers, but couldn't resist the offer of warmth. 3 elderly men broke ranks and shuffled toward the carts. Their hands trembled as they accepted bowls of soup. They wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt my leadership cracking. Father Matteo turned his attention back to me. His eyes were kind but penetrating, as if he could see past my megaphone and my banner and my anger straight into the confusion underneath. "You seem to be leading," he said gently. "Would you like some?" The question hung in the cold air between us. Every eye in the crowd turned toward me. Muslims waiting to see what their organizer would do. Christians watching to see if their gesture would be accepted. Police officers observing. Media cameras recording. My throat felt tight. My mind raced through options. Accept the soup and look weak? Refuse and look foolish? Argue and lose the moment? But Father Matteo's eyes held something I couldn't name. Not judgment. Not smugness. Not the satisfaction of someone who would outmaneuver an opponent. Just invitation. Like he genuinely wanted me to be warm. Like my comfort actually mattered to him. "Would you like some?" he asked again, his voice even softer. And I realized with growing horror that I had no idea how to respond to an enemy who refused to be my enemy. "I don't accept charity from those who want to destroy my faith," I said sharply, lifting my megaphone slightly as if it were a shield. The words came out harsher than I intended. Defensive. Almost desperate. Father Matteo didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't even look offended. Instead, His expression softened with something that looked like genuine sadness. "I'm sorry you believe that," he said quietly. "But today, we only want to love our neighbors." That sentence hit me harder than any insult could have. Not because it was clever. Not because it was a perfect counterargument. But because it was simple, direct, and spoken with a sincerity that made my accusations feel hollow. Love our neighbors. The words echoed in my mind even as I tried to push them away. This wasn't love. This was manipulation. It had to be. Enemies don't love. They scheme. They plot. They use kindness as a weapon. But Father Matteo had already turned away. He wasn't waiting for my response. He wasn't trying to win the argument. He simply walked back to his volunteers and began helping them distribute food. And for the next 30 minutes, I stood there and watched something I couldn't explain. The elderly nuns moved through the crowd with blankets, draping them over the shoulders of protesters who were shivering. They didn't speak. They didn't preach. They just served. The young volunteers offered bread and water to anyone who would take it. When protesters shouted accusations at them, "You are trying to convert us. This is a trap. You hate Islam." They listened without defending themselves. One volunteer, a young woman maybe 20 years old, stood patiently while a man in our group yelled in her face for 5 full minutes about Christian hypocrisy. She never interrupted, never argued back. When he finally stopped, exhausted, she simply said, "Would you like some water? You sound thirsty." He took the bottle. His hands were shaking. The crowd was fracturing. More people accepted soup. Some sat on the cathedral steps to eat, their protest signs leaning forgotten against the stone walls. Others stood in small groups, talking in low, confused voices. What are they doing? Why aren't they fighting back? This doesn't make sense. The anger that had united us was dissolving into something more dangerous: doubt. I tried to rally them. I raised my megaphone and shouted about manipulation tactics, about how Christians use charity to soften people up for conversion. But my voice sounded shrill even to my own ears. Desperate. Because what I was seeing didn't match what I was saying. Enemies don't act like this. Enemies defend themselves. They argue. They try to prove you wrong. They match anger with anger, accusation with counter-accusation. These people were doing something different. Something I had no category for. They were absorbing our rage without retaliating. They were serving us without demanding anything in return. They were treating us with dignity we hadn't shown them. My mind raced, trying to fit this into my understanding of Christian missionary tactics. This had to be the first step in some elaborate strategy. Gain trust, then strike. Show kindness, then demand conversion. But 30 minutes passed, and no one asked us about Jesus. No one handed out Bibles. No one even tried to start a theological conversation. They just loved us. The words kept echoing. We only want to love our neighbors. Then Father Matteo returned. He approached me again, moving slowly, his limp more pronounced now. He must have been in pain, but his face remained peaceful. "Yusuf," he said, and I startled at the sound of my name. Had someone told him? Had he asked? "If you believe we are doing harm," he continued, his voice quiet enough that only I could hear, "come inside. See everything. How we operate, what we teach, how we serve. No cameras. No speeches. Complete transparency." Every instinct in me screamed no. This was dangerous. Going inside would be a betrayal. My mosque elders would be furious. The protesters would see it as surrender. And what if I saw something that confirmed my worst fears? What if they were manipulating vulnerable Muslims? But another voice, one I didn't recognize, whispered something different. Go. See for yourself. Stop being afraid of the truth. Father Matteo waited. He didn't pressure. Didn't plead. Just offered the invitation and stood there, patient and calm. I looked at the crowd. At the protesters eating soup and wrapped in blankets. At the volunteers still serving without asking for anything in return. At the confusion on everyone's faces. And I realized that my certainty was cracking. 5 of us, I heard myself say. 5 of us will come inside. Father Matteo nodded. Of course. Bring whoever you trust. As I turned to select which men would accompany me, my hands were trembling. Not from the cold anymore. From fear. I chose 4 men I trusted. Ahmad, Karim, Hassan, and my cousin Bilal. We followed Father Matteo through the heavy wooden doors, our shoes echoing on the stone floor. We were tense. Suspicious. Ready to document anything that proved our accusations. But what we found inside wasn't what any of us expected. The cathedral interior was nothing like I'd imagined. I had pictured gold everywhere, ornate statues, jeweled crosses, wealth displayed while they pretended to serve the poor. The hypocrisy I was certain we'd find. Instead, there was simplicity. Rows of wooden pews, worn smooth by decades of use. Plain white walls. Simple candles flickering in the dim light. The smell of incense and old stone. Everything felt humble, quiet, like a place that had witnessed suffering and prayer in equal measure. This way, Father Matteo said softly, leading us down a side corridor. We passed through a small doorway into what he called the prayer chapel. It was barely larger than my apartment's living room. More candles. A simple wooden cross on the wall. And a table covered with slips of paper. This is where we keep our prayer intentions, Father Matteo explained. Anyone can write a name or a need. We pray for them during our services. Karim stepped forward and picked up one of the papers. His eyes widened. This one says, Fatima, healing from trauma, he said quietly. That's a Muslim name. I moved closer and began reading the slips scattered across the table. Muhammad, find work. The Ahmadi family, safety and peace. The Islamic Center on Rue Saint-Pierre, God's blessing. Refugees at the harbor, protection and hope. And then I saw the line that made my stomach tighten. Those who protest us, that they would know they are loved. Not our enemies. Not the Muslims outside. Not even those who hate us. Those who protest us, that they would know they are loved. I stared at those words until they blurred. My throat felt tight. You pray for us? Hassan asked, his voice uncertain. Father Matteo nodded. Every day. By name when we know them. As a group when we don't. None of us knew what to say. He led us through the aid distribution rooms next. We inspected everything with the scrutiny of investigators searching for evidence. We looked for the manipulation we were certain had to be there. In the food distribution area, volunteers were packing bags with rice, vegetables, canned goods. No Bibles tucked inside. No Christian pamphlets. Just food. Do people have to pray to receive this? Ahmad asked, his tone challenging. No, a volunteer answered simply. They just have to need it. Do you try to convert them? We answer questions if people ask. But we don't require anything. In the counseling rooms, I saw schedules posted on the wall. Trauma therapy. Language classes. Job assistance. Legal aid for refugees. Do you make them study Christianity? I pressed. Father Matteo shook his head. We offer a Bible study on Wednesday evenings. It's optional. Many who come here never attend it. What if they ask about mosques? We give them directions, a young volunteer said, pulling out a hand-drawn map with 3 local mosques clearly marked. We want people to have community and faith, whatever that looks like for them. The evidence was contradicting everything I'd believed. I had been certain they were predators disguised as servants. That their charity was bait. That their kindness was manipulation. But standing in these rooms, seeing their operation, reading their prayers, I couldn't find the deception I'd been so sure existed. Bilal caught my eye. He looked as confused as I felt. We toured for 40 minutes. We asked hard questions. We looked for cracks in their story. We found none. When we emerged from the cathedral, the protest had dissolved. Most of the crowd had wandered away. A few people still stood in small groups, talking quietly, holding empty soup bowls. Our banners lay discarded on the ground. The megaphone sat silent on the cathedral steps. There was no victory chant. No viral confrontation for social media. No clear narrative to take back to the mosque. Just confusion. And questions. And a strange, uncomfortable silence. Ahmad and Hassan left quickly, barely speaking. Kareem muttered something about needing to pray. Bilal squeezed my shoulder but said nothing. I walked home alone through the cold streets of Marseille. My mind raced, trying to process what I'd seen. Trying to fit it into my understanding of Christianity, of missionaries, of enemies of Islam. But nothing fit. Why would they pray for us by name? Why serve without demanding anything? Why treat us with dignity we hadn't shown them? Why give directions to mosques? Why display such transparency if they had something to hide? Those who protest us, that they would know they are loved. The questions followed me home. They sat with me through dinner. They kept me awake that night, staring at the ceiling while my fiancée Laila slept peacefully beside me. Why would enemies feed us? Why invite inspection? Why pray for people who shouted, "Eradicate," at them? And the question I was most afraid to ask. What if I was wrong? The questions didn't leave. Days passed. Then a week. I went through the motions of normal life. Work, prayers, meals with Laila, Friday at the mosque. But underneath everything, the questions gnawed at me like something alive. Why would enemies feed us? Why invite inspection? Why pray for people who wanted to eradicate them? I couldn't sleep properly. I'd lie awake beside Laila, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, replaying every moment from that Sunday. The soup. The blankets. Father Matthew's calm voice. Those prayer slips with Muslim names written in careful handwriting. Those who protest us, that they would know they are loved. I told myself it was strategy. Elaborate, patient, long-term strategy. Christians were clever. They knew aggressive evangelism didn't work in Muslim communities, so they'd adapted. Love bombing. That's what it was called, wasn't it? But the explanation felt hollow. On Thursday evening, I drove 40 minutes outside my neighborhood to a bookstore I'd never visited. I told Laila I was meeting someone from the mosque. The lie came easily. Too easily. The bookstore was small, dusty, tucked between a pharmacy and a closed restaurant. I walked in wearing sunglasses, even though the sun had already set. Paranoid. Guilty. I found the religious section in the back corner. My hands trembled as I pulled a French Bible from the shelf. It felt heavier than it should have. Dangerous. Like contraband. Just research, I whispered to myself. Know your enemy better. Understand their tactics. Find the contradictions everyone talks about. I paid cash. Avoided eye contact with the elderly woman at the register. Stuffed the Bible in a plastic bag and shoved it under my car seat before driving home. For 3 days, it stayed there. Hidden. Untouched. Every time I got in my car, I felt its presence beneath me like a secret that could destroy everything. My engagement. My position at the mosque. My family's respect. My entire identity. But the questions wouldn't stop. Late on Sunday night, when Lila was visiting her sister, I finally pulled it out. My hands were shaking. I felt like a traitor just holding it. I opened to the Gospels, Matthew first, because I'd heard it was the most Jewish, the most connected to the prophets I already knew. And immediately, something felt wrong. Not wrong like corrupted or false. Wrong like unexpected. Jesus didn't sound like a manipulator. He didn't sound like someone building an empire or consolidating power. He didn't sound like the Christian missionaries I'd debated, citing systematic theology and doctrine. He sounded dangerous in a completely different way. Love your enemies, I read. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who persecute you. I thought of Father Matteo praying for us. For me specifically, probably. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. The volunteers standing calmly while we screamed in their faces. I kept reading. I couldn't stop. Jesus touched lepers, people religion had rejected as unclean. He ate with tax collectors and prostitutes. He defended an adulteress from stones. He welcomed children. He washed his disciples' feet like a servant. He didn't build power. He surrendered it. He had every chance to be a king, a military leader, a revolutionary who could overthrow Rome. Instead, he chose a cross. This wasn't the Christianity I'd been taught to fight against. This wasn't prosperity gospel or colonialism or cultural imperialism. This was something else entirely. And it terrified me. Because if Jesus was who he claimed to be, not just a prophet, but God himself walking among humanity, then everything I believed was wrong. The foundation of my entire life would crumble. I read until 3 a.m. Then hid the Bible in my closet, behind winter clothes Lila never touched. The next night, I read again. And the night after that. I couldn't tell anyone. The mosque community would see it as betrayal. My family would be devastated. My uncle the imam would probably never speak to me again. Lila would. I couldn't even imagine her reaction. The isolation was suffocating. I was carrying a secret that felt like it was eating me alive. Every conversation felt like a performance. Every prayer at the mosque felt hollow. I was standing in two worlds simultaneously, belonging fully to neither. 2 weeks after buying the Bible, I sat alone in my apartment at midnight. Lila was asleep in the bedroom. The Bible lay open on my lap to the Gospel of John. My chest felt tight. My mind was drowning in questions I couldn't answer and doubts I couldn't share. And in that desperate moment, I whispered a prayer I never thought I'd pray. God. My voice cracked. If Jesus is not who he claims to be, take this curiosity away. Take this Bible. Take these questions. Let me go back to certainty. I paused, barely breathing. But if he is? The words felt like stepping off a cliff. If he is who he says, show me. Please. I need to know the truth. Nothing happened. No voice. No vision. No supernatural experience. Just silence and the sound of my own heartbeat. I closed the Bible and went to bed, feeling foolish and lost and more alone than I'd ever been. Nothing happened that night. Or the next day. Or the day after that. 3 days passed in agonizing limbo. I went to work at the community center, where I coordinated youth programs. I smiled at colleagues. I answered emails. I pretended everything was normal, while my insides churned with doubt and fear. Had God heard my prayer? Was silence itself an answer? Maybe the whole thing was foolish, a moment of weakness I should forget. But I couldn't forget. The questions remained. The curiosity didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. I found myself thinking about Jesus at the strangest moments. While making coffee. While driving. While listening to sermons at Friday prayers that suddenly felt distant, like I was hearing them through water. Regret came in waves. What had I done? What had I asked for? Did I really want my entire worldview dismantled? Did I really want to lose everything? Family, community, identity, for what might be a lie? But then again, what if it was the truth? On the third night, Lila went to bed early. She'd been distant lately, sensing something was wrong but unable to name it. I'd become a stranger in my own life, carrying secrets too heavy to share. I sat alone in our small living room, with the lamp on low. The Bible lay open on my lap. Gospel of John again. I'd been reading about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. The words blurred as exhaustion set in. I'd barely slept in 3 days. My mind felt fragmented, scattered between fear and hope and confusion. I wasn't even sure I was still praying. Just existing in the silence. And then, without warning, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No blinding light. No audible voice. No angels appearing. But suddenly, instantly, a weight lifted off my chest that I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Not just the weight of the last 3 weeks. The weight of years. Decades. A burden I'd carried so long I'd mistaken it for normal. Peace flooded the room. Not excitement. Not euphoria. Not the emotional high I'd felt after powerful sermons at the mosque. This was different. Deeper. Quieter. Like coming home after being lost for years. Like taking the first full breath after almost drowning. Like being known, truly, completely, intimately known, and loved anyway. The peace didn't make logical sense. Nothing about my circumstances had changed. I still faced the same impossible situation. The same losses waiting on the horizon. The same devastating choices ahead. But in that moment, wrapped in that inexplicable peace, I knew. Not with my mind. Not through argument or evidence or theological reasoning. I knew with a certainty deeper than logic, more fundamental than thought. Jesus was real. Not just a prophet. Not just a good teacher. Not just a historical figure misunderstood by his followers. He was alive. Present. Calling me. And everything I'd built my life on was wrong. Not because Islam was evil or my family had deceived me or the Quran was entirely false. But because I'd been standing in the doorway of a house, insisting I understood the whole building, when there were rooms I'd never entered. Truths I'd never encountered. Jesus wasn't asking me to abandon truth. He was inviting me to step into it fully. Tears came then. Silent at first, then harder. My shoulders shook. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from waking Lila. Wonder and terror and relief crashed over me in waves. Wonder at what I'd just experienced. The presence of something, someone, so real it made everything else feel like shadows. Terror at what this meant. The life I'd have to leave behind. The people I'd lose. The pain I'd cause. The isolation ahead. Relief that the questions finally had an answer. That the restless searching had found its destination. That I wasn't crazy or deceived or betrayed by my own mind. I sat there for 2 hours, crying and trembling and feeling more alive than I'd ever felt. The Bible lay forgotten in my lap. I didn't need to read anymore. The words had become flesh, somehow, and that flesh had touched me in a way that changed everything. When I finally stood and walked to the window, Marseille stretched out before me in the darkness. Light scattered across the city. People sleeping in their beds, unaware that in one small apartment, a man's entire world had just been unmade and remade. I looked at my reflection in the glass. Same face. Same body. But the person looking back was different. Everything was about to change. My engagement to Laila, over. My position at the mosque, finished. My family's pride in me, shattered. My friends, my community, my reputation, my future as I'd imagined it, gone. And there was no going back. You can't unknow what you've known. You can't unfeel what you've felt. You can't pretend you haven't encountered the living God, when His peace still fills your chest like light. I whispered into the darkness. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what happens next. But I'm yours now. Whatever that means. The peace remained. And somehow, that was enough. I told Laila first. 3 days after that night of peace, I sat across from her at a small kitchen table and spoke the words that would end our engagement. I believe Jesus is who He claimed to be. I'm becoming a Christian. She stared at me like I'd spoken in a language she didn't understand. Then her face crumpled. You are joking, she whispered. Please tell me you are joking. I wasn't joking. She left that night, packed a bag through tears, and went to her parents' house. The ring I'd saved 2 years to buy sat on the table between us, abandoned. I loved who you were, she said at the door, her voice breaking. I don't even know who you are now. The door closed. The apartment fell silent. And the losses had only just begun. The mosque leadership called an emergency meeting. I sat in a room with 5 elders, including my uncle Rashid. Their faces were stone. My uncle wouldn't look at me. Is it true? The head imam asked. Have you apostatized? The word hung in the air like an accusation and a verdict combined. I believe Jesus is the Son of God, I said quietly. I can't deny what I know to be true. My uncle finally looked at me then. The pain in his eyes was worse than anger. You were supposed to be Islam's defender, he said, his voice thick. I believed in you. They removed me from all leadership positions immediately. Youth coordinator, gone. Teaching responsibilities, revoked. Friday prayer attendance, discouraged until you repent. Public humiliation followed. Word spread through the Muslim community within days. Social media exploded. Posts appeared calling me a traitor, a sellout, a false Muslim who would been secretly working for Christians all along. How much did they pay you? One comment demanded. You've betrayed your family and your people. Another read. Apostates deserve what's coming to them. Someone wrote, and I knew exactly what they meant. Death threats arrived in my inbox. Vague at first, then specific. People I'd prayed beside for years blocked my number. Friends I'd known since childhood stopped responding to messages. Ahmad, who would enter the cathedral with me, crossed the street when he saw me coming. My phone became a weapon of isolation. Every notification, another relationship severed. Every silence, another bridge burned. I walked through my neighborhood, streets where I'd grown up, shops where everyone knew my name, and felt invisible. Or worse, visible in the wrong way. People stared, whispered. Some turned their backs deliberately. The butcher who would give me free cuts of meat for years served me without speaking, his face hard. The cafe owner where I'd spent countless afternoons studying Islam asked me not to return. You are bad for business, he said quietly. People are uncomfortable. Then came the family confrontation. My mother sat in her living room, the same room where she taught Quran to neighborhood children. She looked smaller somehow. Older. Her eyes were red from crying. How could you do this to us? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. After everything we taught you? After everything we sacrificed. Mama, I didn't choose this to hurt you. You chose apostasy. Her voice cracked. You chose to abandon Allah. To abandon your family. To destroy everything. My father stood by the window, silent. He hadn't spoken to me in the 2 weeks since he'd heard. Uncle Rashid was there too. You are not welcome at the mosque anymore, he said formally. You are not welcome in this house. You are not. His voice broke. You are not my nephew anymore. My mother's tears were the hardest part. Not the anger. Not the threats. Not the public shaming or the lost job opportunities as word spread through professional networks. The tears of a mother who believed her son was damaged. I lost my position at the community center within a month. We've had complaints, my supervisor said, unable to meet my eyes. From Muslim families. They're not comfortable with you working with their children. My savings dwindled. Rent became a struggle. Friends who might have helped had all vanished. I was alone in a way I'd never imagined possible. Alone in my apartment at night. Alone in streets once familiar. Alone with the weight of every bridge I'd burned and every relationship I'd destroyed. Some nights, the isolation pressed so hard I could barely breathe. I'd sit in the darkness wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. If the peace I'd felt had been an illusion. If losing everything was worth whatever truth I thought I'd found. But then, in the darkest moments, the peace would return. Quiet. Steady. Unexplainable. Not happiness. Not the absence of pain. But a presence. A knowing that I wasn't actually alone. That someone was walking through this devastation with me. The peace didn't make the losses hurt less. Laila was still gone. My family still rejected me. The threats still came. But somehow, impossibly, I could keep breathing. 4 months after that night in my apartment, I made a decision. I contacted St. Agnes Cathedral. Asked to speak with Father Matteo. I'd like to be baptized, I told him over the phone, my voice shaking. Quietly, if possible. I don't want attention. I need to make this official. There was a long pause. Then Father Matteo's gentle voice. We'd be honored, Yusuf. How about dawn? Just a few of us. Simple and sacred. I was going back to the cathedral. Not to protest. Not to accuse. Not to defend Islam or attack Christianity. To die and be reborn in water. To make visible what had already happened inside me. The sun hadn't risen yet when I arrived at St. Agnes Cathedral. The streets of Marseille were empty and grey. A cold wind blew off the Mediterranean, carrying the salt smell of the sea. I walked slowly toward the same doors I'd stood before 6 months ago, screaming that Christianity should be eradicated. My hands trembled, but not from the cold. I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Candlelight flickered inside. A handful of people sat scattered in the pews, maybe 8 or 10. The elderly nuns who would brought soup that Sunday. A few young volunteers. And Father Matteo, standing near the baptismal font at the front. He turned when he heard my footsteps echoing on the stone floor. And he smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not an, I told you so, smile. Just pure, uncomplicated joy. Yusuf, he said, walking toward me with that familiar slight limp. Welcome home. Those 2 words broke something open in my chest. Home. I'd lost my home. My family's house was close to me. My community had exiled me. My apartment felt like a prison of isolation. But standing in that cathedral at dawn, surrounded by people I'd once hated, I felt something I hadn't expected. I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Father Matteo embraced me, a quick, fatherly hug, then led me toward the front. The baptismal font was simple stone, filled with water that reflected the candlelight. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The ceremony was simple, sacred, intimate. Father Matteo spoke words I'd heard before in different contexts, but never understood. "Yusuf, do you renounce the spiritual forces of wickedness, reject the evil powers of this world, and repent of your sin?" "I do." "Do you turn to Jesus Christ and accept Him as your Savior?" "I do." The words felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. "Do you put your whole trust in His grace and love?" "I do." "Do you promise to follow and obey Him as your Lord?" I thought of everything I was losing. Everything I'd already lost. The family who wouldn't speak to me. The friends who would turn away. The life I'd built that lay in ruins. And I thought of that night 4 months ago, when peace had flooded my apartment. When I'd known, really known, that Jesus was real and alive and calling me. "I do." Father Matteo placed his hand on my head. "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The water poured over me. Cold and clean and somehow final. I went under a Muslim named Yusuf ben Khalid, defender of Islam, organizer of protests, keeper of certainty. I came up a Christian named Yusuf, follower of Jesus, bearer of impossible peace. The external marking of an internal transformation that had already shattered and remade me. When I opened my eyes, several people were crying quietly in the pews. One of the elderly nuns, Sister Marie, I'd learn later, was smiling through tears. The young volunteers came forward and embraced me one by one. People I'd screamed at. People I'd accused of destroying faith. People who would serve me soup while I held a megaphone demanding they leave our community. They welcomed me like family. No conditions. No probation period. No, you have to prove yourself first. Just acceptance. Just love. I stood there dripping, overwhelmed by grief and joy crashing together like waves. Mourning my mother's tears and my uncle's rejection. Celebrating this new birth and this impossible peace. Both emotions were real. Both were true. Both existed in the same moment, in the same heart. This was my new reality, living between two worlds. The Muslim community that had formed me but now rejected me. The Christian community that welcomed me but would never fully understand what I'd lost to be here. I was a bridge whether I wanted to be or not. Standing in the space between, belonging fully to neither, necessary to both. After the baptism, we shared bread and coffee in the cathedral's small kitchen. Father Matteo sat beside me, quiet and present. "What happens now?" I asked him. He smiled. "Now you learn to live as who you've become. It won't be easy. The grief will come in waves. But you won't walk through it alone." "I don't know how to be Christian," I admitted. "I don't know the prayers or the traditions or—" "You'll learn," he interrupted gently. "But Yusuf, you already know the most important thing." "What's that?" "You know how to be loved. And how to love in return." He paused, then added, "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. We still do food distribution every Sunday morning. The same cart that fed you that day. Would you consider volunteering? We could use someone who understands both communities. Someone who's walked both paths." I looked at him in disbelief. "You want me to serve at the food cart?" "If you are willing." The same cart that had broken my certainty. The same soup that had cracked my worldview. The same blankets that had made my anger dissolve. Now he was asking me to be on the other side. To be the one serving instead of shouting. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'd be honored." And in that simple agreement, I found my new calling. Not as Islam's defender. As love's servant. Present day. 2 years later. I stand behind the food cart outside St. Agnes Cathedral on a cold Sunday morning, ladling soup into bowls just as volunteers once did for me. The steam rises in the winter air. My hands, the same hands that once gripped a megaphone and held a protest banner, now grip a soup lahale and offer blankets. And then I hear it. That familiar sound that once gave me such power and purpose. Chanting. Stop targeting Muslims. Stop your manipulation. About 40 protesters round the corner, marching toward the cathedral. Young men mostly, a few women, all carrying signs. Their faces are set with the same righteous anger I remember feeling. The same absolute certainty that they are defending God. I recognize the pattern because I created it. Sister Mori glances at me nervously. Should we go inside? No, I say quietly. We stay. We serve. The protesters arrive and form their line. Their leader, a young man maybe 25, passionate and articulate, raises his megaphone. He begins listing accusations. Manipulation. Cultural erasure. Predatory charity. The words are almost identical to ones I shouted 2 years ago. I lagale soup. I don't argue. I don't defend. I just prepare bowls and wait. One of the protesters notices me and stops chanting. His eyes narrow. Wait, he calls out, pointing. Isn't that Yusuf Ben Khalid? The chanting falters. More protesters turn to look. Recognition spreads through their ranks like ripples in water. The traitor, someone mutters. The apostate, another adds. He used to organize protests like this, a third voice says, confused. Now he's serving them. The young leader with the megaphone stares at me, processing. Then his face hardens with disgust. You sold out, he shouts through the megaphone. How much did they pay you? I've heard this accusation so many times it barely stings anymore. I don't respond. Instead, I pick up a ball of soup and walk toward them. The protesters tense. Some step back. But I keep walking until I'm standing in front of their leader. Close enough to see the conviction burning in his young eyes. Close enough to remember exactly how that conviction felt. I hold out the ball. You've been standing in the cold, I say quietly. Your hands must be freezing. Would you like some soup? He stares at the ball like it's poisoned. I don't accept charity from traitors. He spits. I nod slowly. I remember saying almost the same words to Father Matteo. I understand, I say. But the offer stands. For all of you. You can keep protesting. We'll keep serving. No strings attached. I set the ball on the ground in front of him and walk back to the cart. For the next 40 minutes, we serve anyone who approaches. Some protesters maintain their distance, shouting intermittently. Others drift closer, curiosity overcoming anger. An older man accepts a ball, his hands shaking from cold. A young woman takes a blanket, avoiding eye contact. A teenage boy whispers, "Thank you," so quietly I almost miss it. And some want to talk. Why did you convert? A middle-aged protester asks me, genuine confusion in his voice. I encountered Jesus, I say simply, and I couldn't deny what I'd experienced. But Islam is the truth, he insists. I believed that with my whole heart, I tell him. I understand why you believe it. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just here to serve. He studies my face, searching for deception, and finds only peace. You seem different than I expected, he admits. Love does that, I say, handing him another ball for his friend. By the end, The protest dissolves into the same confused dispersal mine did 2 years ago. No viral confrontation. No clear victory for either side. Just people walking away with full stomachs and uncertain hearts, carrying questions they didn't arrive with. The young leader is the last to leave. He stands across the street, watching me clean the food cart. Our eyes meet for a moment. I see myself in him. The passion. The certainty. The conviction that he's defending God against enemies. I pray silently that his journey won't take as long as mine did. That night, as I lock up the cathedral kitchen, Father Matteo finds me. "You handled that beautifully," he says. "I just did what you did for me," I reply. He shakes his head. "No, Yusuf. You did what Jesus did for all of us. You loved your enemies. You blessed those who cursed you. You became what you once fought against, and that's the most powerful testimony of all." I think about his words as I walk home through Marseille's quiet streets. From banner holder to soup server. From accuser to servant. From absolute certainty to humble faith. From Eradicate Christianity to Welcome Home. Only divine love could accomplish such a complete reversal. The losses still ache. My mother still won't speak to me. My uncle still considers me dead. Laila married someone else last year. I saw the photos online. But the peace remains. And the calling is clear. Every Sunday, I return to that food cart. Every Sunday, some protesters come, new faces carrying old anger, fighting battles I once fought. And every Sunday, I serve them soup. Because I learned something that cold morning 2 years ago, something that transformed everything. Faith isn't defeated by force. It's undone by love. Arguments don't change hearts. Debates don't open eyes. But soup served with genuine care to people shouting hate, that speaks a language deeper than words. Next Sunday, I know, more protesters will come. They'll chant and accuse and demand we stop. And I'll be there with bowls of hot soup, warm blankets, and a quiet prayer that one of them, just one, might experience what I did. That moment when the doors open and love walks out. That moment when certainty cracks and grace floods in. That moment when you realize the enemies you came to fight have been praying for you by name all along. And maybe, like me, they'll discover that losing everything for Jesus means finding everything you never knew you needed. One ball of soup at a time.